Senator, good morning, and thanks for taking some time to spend with us on the Ozarks this morning.
Yeah, I'm glad to be back. I actually mentioned the other day and putting the schedule together. I said, I haven't talked to KB in a long time, and not letting me call in. And I said, no, it just hasn't worked out. But I'm glad to be with you, and I got sort of my mouth is watering for a steak after listening to that commercial I just heard.
Oh, they've got some good steaks over there at J. Culpeper's. I'll tell you what, if you get down here, we'll go over and kick back and enjoy one. I wanted to start the conversation off this morning by giving you the opportunity to have the floor and kind of talk about what's on your mind. And then, of course, we have some other issues that we wanted to discuss. If you don't touch on those issues as we give you the opportunity to kind of talk about what's on your mind this morning, Senator.
Well, I continue to hope that the Senate will begin to get its work done. One of the great frustrations of me the 2 years I've been in the Senate is that the majority has just simply refused to do the basic things that have to be done for us to begin to get spending under control and, frankly, to monitor the activities of the government. No budget in almost 4 years now. Somebody pointed out the other day that the last time the Senate had a budget, the budget that the law requires annually you're supposed to pass, nobody had an iPad yet. iPads have been invented and marketed since the last time the Senate had a budget. The budget, the appropriations bills, getting these problems solved and looking at the long-term commitments we've made to people with things like Social Security and Medicare, and be sure that you look at those programs in a way that allows them to last rather than just say, we don't care that they're not going to be solvent in a short period of time. We're going to not make any changes. That makes no sense at all. One of the things I'm going to be talking about today, KB, on the Senate floor at some point are these appointments that the President made to particularly the National Labor Relations Board that the 3 Court of Appeals judges said last Friday were totally unconstitutional because the President decided he could make them without the Senate confirming them, and the Constitution does matter, and it looks like the courts are on the way. Ultimately, the Supreme Court will probably have to uphold this, but I'm going to introduce legislation today that says these 3 people cannot be paid, and in fact, none of the rules and regulations that they promulgated, that they put forth as after the President appointed them illegally to this board, none of those rules and regulations are enforceable. It's time the President and the Senate particularly started doing the work that needs to be done, and the President's view that, if we can't do it by executive order, maybe it's not worth doing, is not nearly good enough, in my opinion.
Well, I'll tell you what, a lot of people, especially the listeners to this radio program, have noticed a tone in the President's voice here, certainly in the last year or more, where it sounds, and again, it almost sounds as though he's not a president, he's somewhat of a dictator in the way that he puts forth his thoughts and ideas to the American people, and then talks to members of Congress saying, do what's right, pass this bill, do what's right, help me out here. And rather than people, going up to Washington, D.C. to do what the constituents want them to do, they're being told by this president, do what I want you to do. And you speak of executive orders, certainly that is something that has come to the forefront regarding gun control, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. But overall, I think one of the interesting issues that we have to really start looking at, a lot of people are very concerned about it, is after we got through the whole fiscal cliff debacle at the end of the year and got into the new year, it seems like the can is being kicked down the road to some degree, and we're really not hearing a whole lot in the way of spending cuts. And I think that's, again, a big issue, especially with the conversation of raising the debt limit looming. Any thoughts on spending cuts and your thoughts of what can be done to hold this president's feet to the fire when it comes to spending cuts?
Well, we need to do that. The spending is the problem. I think the tax policies that are now permanent are certainly unbelievably better than going back to the 2000 tax policies would have been, and that sends a a message to the economy that, okay, we can deal with our decisions now based on what we believe to be the permanent tax policies of the country for the foreseeable future. More American energy is such a big issue that hopefully even the president can't slow that down as much as he'd like to. But spending has to get under control. I do think the House passing the bill that said the Senate has to have a budget or nobody gets paid, I think that's fine. I wish we'd have used the debt ceiling to get a little more spending cuts at that moment. I think we've got every moment we can get to have spending cuts, we need to have them. My guess, KB, is that the across-the-board cuts that got kicked down the road, as you suggested, for a couple of months, are likely to happen at the end of February. And while across-the-board cutting is the worst way to make cuts, it's better than not having spending cuts at all. The real spending, though, is on the defined program side, the so-called entitlement side of the budget, where 60% of all the money gets spent. And for that to change, you've got to reform these programs in a way that ensures that they're going to last and that we can meet our obligations to people who qualify for military retirement and Social Security and other things that are clearly part of that so-called entitlement side of the budget.
Sure. Now, another area of concern, and of course, Secretary of State Hillary Clinton addressed the House and the Senate talking about Benghazi. There was obviously some emotional testimony from Ms. Clinton. And your take on all of this, will we ever really get to the bottom of what happened in Benghazi? You know, 4 Americans losing their lives, a whole series of what seemed to be, and I guess maybe lies would be the best way to use this particular word, because they talked about the anti-Islamic video, which we know wasn't the purpose behind the attack on the consulate there in Benghazi, Libya, and some other things that have kind of fallen into place, which have really taken the focus off of what occurred there. And the president, again, going out on a limb and saying justice will be done. Well, we know to this particular point, no justice has been done. And I, again, look to the victims and then, of course, their families. And the Secretary of State saying that she was there when the coffins with the flags draped over them were brought off the plane and used as somewhat of an emotional response from people. But your thoughts on Benghazi, will we ever get to the bottom of this?
Well, you know, I think it's perfectly understandable to be emotional about having to tell people that to be there as these coffins arrive. I know one of the hardest parts of the job I've had for several years is we've had men and women involved overseas is to call parents and to call family members, and usually not the first call, but an early call to say, what can I do to be helpful now? And those are hard calls to make, and sure. I appreciate the Secretary of State's emotion that she may have had on that. I do think that the idea of what difference does it make, how these people got killed, it makes a lot of difference. And that was the answer. It makes a lot of difference, Secretary Clinton, how these people got killed and what the government said about it and what we're going to do about it in the future. I was on the Intelligence Committee in the Senate and the House both for several years, and during Benghazi, I just left that committee to go on armed services for a while as we're dealing with restructuring the military. I thought that was a good thing for me to do right now. But there was never any question, I don't think, that they were not telling the truth. And, you know, the people who were in Benghazi were in Ramstein at the hospital in Germany the next day. All you had to do was ask them, was there a riot before these killings started? And the answer, KB, was no. The administration did not tell the truth about this. In my view, they knew they weren't telling the truth about it, and that's a big deal. Now, the press seems to be almost totally uninterested in this, even though there was loss of life. You know, when you look back at the so-called the Valerie Flame incident, which, oh my gosh, you'd have thought the whole world was going to end because somebody might have possibly been put in jeopardy by their name being made public, and all kinds of uproar when it was the Bush administration. In this administration, people actually were killed, 2 of them killed 7 hours after the first 2. I think it's totally unacceptable that we didn't get somebody there, our allies who had security forces in the area or our own forces to save those last 2 lives. I'm not sure that the ambassador and one other person, their lives were lost pretty quickly, but the other people are 7 hours later. It's unacceptable, and it does matter. It does make a difference no matter what the Secretary of State said about that.
Well, and it's interesting that you bring that up because, of course, there were forces there that were ready to go in and help those people out. We know that they were told to stand down. Also, we know that as far as the whole Benghazi situation, Senator Blunt, that a lot of things, a lot of questions are unanswered, and certainly at some point we would like to see those questions get answered. I'm sure the Secretary of State is hoping that maybe things cool off because if, of course, she decides to throw her hat in the ring for a presidential run in 2016, this is obviously something that's going to come back to the forefront. One of the other areas that we wanted to discuss, actually, there's 2 more. I don't know how much time you have, but I'd like to throw out a couple of more quick topics to you. We had a call.
Right, let's try to do 2 more, and we'll do them pretty quick, and okay. I'm glad to be with you this morning.
Well, and we do certainly appreciate your time, sir. Weapons to Egypt. Now, we know that the Arab Spring has come and gone, and we're seeing kind of a different type of a position taken by the current leader of Egypt, more of a dictatorship to some degree, wanting to continue to kind of keep the people of Egypt under his thumb there. Does the United States have any plans for getting any more weapons to Egypt, tanks, planes, what have you?
Well, it's a very big problem for us. I was in Egypt about a year ago, 2 years ago, actually, right after Mubarak was removed from power. And clearly now, 2 years later, you see one dictatorial leader appears to have been replaced by another one, and this one driven by a religious view of the world that doesn't allow disagreement with that view, and that's a bad thing. At the same time, there are 85 million Egyptians. What happens in Egypt is really important as it relates to what happens in Israel, and we're trying to walk a very fine line here as a country of what to do with Egypt and Syria. Obviously, the concerns about Iran are real, and we shouldn't let Iran get a nuclear weapon. And Egypt just becomes sort of part of that whole big complicated puzzle. Just yesterday, the Egyptian military said that it was possible they might have to seize control again because the country is devolving into chaos. It does appear to me that the current President Morsi does not want democracy, but he's willing to use democracy to get to whatever it is he and his followers do want.
Right. And one final thought, our topic here this morning. Can we get your thoughts on immigration reform? Obviously, this has been brought to the table in recent days. The president going out to Las Vegas. People are a little curious about that trip since, wasn't it, a couple of years ago, he told everybody not to go to Las Vegas, to stay home and save your money. But he takes Air Force One out there to make a 30-minute speech. And immigration reform in general, with about 8 senators coming together, John McCain, Green, Marco Rubio, Charles Schumer and some others, saying that now is the time that we need to take a serious look at immigration reform. We've got 11 million illegal aliens immigrants in this country. They're basically being given a pass, but more importantly, when you talk about doing all of the things that are being discussed with immigration reform, there's obviously going to be some cost. Who do you see picking up and footing the bill on the cost? And do you think in the process of trying to identify and get all these illegals some sort of probationary citizenship with the intent of giving them permanent citizenship in this country, do you think this is really going to work? And your thoughts on all this immigration reform, sir?
Well, first of all, I don't know that the president's trip to Las Vegas was helpful at all. I think the president continuing to believe that he can change Washington with campaign rallies around the country is a bad sign. They announced that they're going to take their campaign organization and turn it into a not-for-profit organization to drive issues, as if the president had great success with getting things done, except for the debacle of health care reform in his first term. And remember, Las Vegas is where the president headed when the Benghazi effort was unfolding. Mm-hmm. He went to Las Vegas that day, too, and that was a much worse day to go to Las Vegas than yesterday, in my opinion, but he did. On immigration, there are really three questions, three areas that need to be resolved. One is securing the border. Two is what are the legitimate workforce needs of the country, and how do we meet those? And three is what do we do with people who either came here illegally, or about half the people who are here illegally probably came legally and then they just stayed beyond the time they were legally supposed to stay. So what do we do about that? And my view continues to be, KB, that for 2 and 3 are much easier to solve if people really believe you'd solve number 1, the securing the border.
Sure.
If you don't do that, people aren't going to believe, nor should they believe, that we've done anything but send another signal that if you can get here, eventually we're going to let you stay, and there's not much we're doing to stop you from getting here. Securing the actual border is a legitimate expectation of a government, and we should be able to do that, and we should do it. It doesn't have to be absolutely airtight to do the job that needs to be done, just like the bank doesn't have to be unrobbable for you and I to think odds are pretty good if we put our money in the bank. That's a safe place for it to be.
Sure.
And then the other border is the hiring desk, and we're going to have to figure out a better way to create some certainty about people applying for work, that they're really who they say they are, and they're legally eligible to work in the country, and that their Social Security contribution is going to their Social Security account, and all of those things. And we've seen this movie before. This is not the first time a gang of senators have come up with a plan that the bullet points all sound like they might work until you really try to produce a piece of legislation. So I think we're a long way from a bill, but for a bill to work, securing the border has to be the first thing that the American people believe you've really done. And at that, people are going to be pretty reasonable about, okay, what do we do about kids who were brought here when they were little kids? What do we do about people who've been here a long time, and you see them at church and you see them at work, and now you find out they haven't legally been here? We can work all of that out. I don't think it should include a path to citizenship, but we can work all of that out if people believe that the border is secured.
Senator Roy Blunt, we haven't talked to you for a while. We gave you a pretty good workout today, and we do certainly appreciate your time, sir. And let us know.
Great to talk to you. Look forward to being with you soon, and we may settle in and have that steak one of these days.
Love to sit down and have a conversation with you. Again, thank you for your time.